continue our analysis now on the situation in Zimbabwe. The South African National Defence Force Chief Joint Operations General Barney Hlatshwayo has said the National Defence Force is tightening controls on the South African border with Zimbabwe, but there are no plans to deploy SA military personnel to that country at this stage. The General raised concerns about a possible flood of immigrants to SA should the situation in Zimbabwe worsen. This comes as the Zimbabwean army took control of the capital city, Harare. Let's continue our focus on the unfolding developments in Zimbabwe. Still with us is Professor David Moore from the Department of Developmental Studies at UJ, but also joining us now is Dr Knox Chitiyo, who is an Associate Fellow for African Program at Chatham House in London. Great to have both of you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for staying on.
Thank you very much.
You've just arrived. You arrived back in South Africa from Zimbabwe yesterday.
Yes.
The professor and I have been bombing questions at you. What was it like? What were the streets like? What was the airport like? How are the people feeling? There's so many questions we need to get out of you. Tell us your experience.
It's been tense. There has been an undercurrent of anxiety, but you know, it's been surprisingly low key. There is a visible presence of soldiers on the streets. There are soldiers at the airport, but they've been polite. They've not been harassing people. Yes, they have been screening people coming in, particularly through the airports, but it's been, you know, they've, I think, made a point that it's been relatively low key. So people are not being harassed per se. Yeah. And people have been getting on more with their business. People did go to work. Some people, of course, were not able to because some of the streets where they live were stopped. But generally, you know, business was performing at the CBD in Harare. Yeah. So there's not an atmosphere of panic as yet.
Yeah, which in itself is a little bit strange, because one thinks a military coup, a takeover, you know, we hear about the broadcaster being taken over, we hear about all of these things, and yet what you're saying is that people are getting on with their daily lives. It seems quite peaceful. There doesn't seem to be this influx of people wanting to desperately leave Zimbabwe. What do you make of this, Professor?
Well, remember on Monday night, Constantino Chiwenga made the announcement that the president's office had been infiltrated by counter-revolutionaries and purgers, and that this would be an effort. And remember, he gave advance notice. You don't often give advance notice you're going to do a coup. But they were very careful to say it's not really a coup of the state, it's a coup within the party, or it's an effort by the military to discipline the party to protect Robert Mugabe from these evil G40 peoples. And so it's been a very subtle move to keep that discourse down, and you know, so not the SADC troops or whoever wouldn't be encouraged to come. People are saying, no, we don't need outsiders, it's an inside job. But of course this has been discussed beforehand in SADC circles. Mnangagwa is a very, very careful operator. The generals he has on his side are very, very careful. We could see this happening, as your editor was saying. You know, Mnangagwa has been talking with even Morgan Tsvangirai in ages, for ages now. Thabo Mbeki's trip up, all sorts of forays of democracy NGOs talking to people. Oh, how can we get together? So maybe the people aren't surprised. And you know, the Zimbabwean people do talk a lot about politics. They probably know more than most of us academics and journalists. So maybe they weren't surprised.
Yeah. You know, there's so many different versions of events that are unfolding and so many different narratives. Some people quoting Zimbabweans as saying, this is possibly the most exciting time in Zimbabwe's history. And yet other people are very, very nervous of the uncertainty that may unfold. What do you make of it? Is it an exciting time for Zimbabwe? Can they finally see some change coming their way, some good change coming their way? Because Zimbabwe has been in a very difficult position for many, many years, where we've seen President Robert Mugabe go from basically being described as the liberator of Zimbabwe from British rule to what is now being described as a dictator.
Well, absolutely. I mean, particularly Zimbabwe's economic trajectory, you know, in the 80s and 90s, it went up, and then from the late 90s and 2000s to now, the trajectory has been steadily down. And so this is a very significant moment in Zimbabwe's history. There's no question about that. I think people are tired of being tired, if one can put it that way. People wanted something different. You know, yes, that the military are being the guardians and the gatekeepers and the drivers of this change is controversial, but people are saying, look, things have got to change. People want a decisive transfer of power, and people are hoping that this can be a gateway to a revival of the economy, and for us as Zimbabweans to see, because what's happened is Zimbabwe, we've become almost from a nation to being a country. And people are hoping that this can be a gateway to, you know, us becoming a nation again and reviving the economy in particular. So this is very, very significant.
Yeah. You know, the Zimbabwe military has been very, very careful to ensure that their presence in the capital and the events that have followed are not a coup. They are not calling it a coup. They are instead calling it a military takeover. Now, perhaps you can help me and our viewers understand the difference. When does a military takeover become a coup? Anyone want to tackle that question for me?
It's kind of the coup that's not a coup, or a coup-coup. I think they tried to say this is within the party, but of course in Zimbabwe the state and the party are so intertwined and so fused you can hardly tell the difference. It's a party state. So a lot of this is semantics, really. When you arrest or detain, or the military police are taking some of the G40 members into the barracks under guard, that's getting pretty close to a coup. When Chombo's security guards are firing back at the troops and possibly 2 people killed, that's pretty close to a coup. So it's a lot of semantics. Another thing is a peaceful transition. But what happens if, in these negotiations that are going on now with South Africa's or SADC's envoys, what happens if Robert Mugabe is still influenced by his beautiful young wife, 52 years old, and says, no, I'm not going to do it?
Yeah.
You know, then the brick wall is up there. Then all these carefully laid plans of mice and men become very complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've got to act very quickly, and you've got to make sure that the surrounding countries are going to support you. I think to suggest, though, that this is really indicating massive change is probably a bit wrong, because we're still talking about the generation of Robert Mugabe. Mnangagwa has been with Robert Mugabe since the 1970s, and he was one of the original liberators in the late 60s. He's 75 years old. He was the key architect of Gukurahundi, in which thousands and thousands of Ndebele people were massacred. If Morgan Tsvangirai joined a transitional government with someone like that, what happens to Matabele land supporters? Why is Dumiso Debengwa in this as a former ZAPU member? The transitional government in 2009 to 2013 was kind of a disaster for the MDC, because they got sucked into this system of corruption, of elite lifestyle, and people were actually very disappointed. Now, monetarily, economically, the GNU brought things up for a little while because they abandoned the Zimbabwean currency and took in the American dollar. One of the aspects of the current crisis is the lack of American dollars and this transfer to the bond note, backed by some loans from the African Development Bank, also some sort of funny treasury bonds that the banks have to accept, electronic transfers. So we would have had a fiscal, a monetary crisis very, very quickly. And I think part of this move is to, stabilize these efforts. Mnangagwa is considered by foreign actors, by the British, and everybody thinks, Mnangagwa, he's the British guy, as an economic conservative. So people are thinking, okay, we'll go back into a transitional government. They'll take all the IMF advice. Patrick Chinamasa, who was the finance minister under the old regime until the cabinet shuffle, just before this thing all happened, he's considered a liberal economic actor. He's been trying to persuade the IMF. He was dumped, put into cyber security. Now he was dumped from the party. Will he come back? Will there be an economic policy reformation?
So there is so much uncertainty. Please, Doctor.
Thanks. If I can just come in on that, what people are saying and thinking at home, people are realists. People are pragmatic. We know that this is not going to be a perfect situation. We know that it's not going to be the sort of democratic process that people had hoped for. But things in Zimbabwe are at such a low level. We're starting from such a low base that what people want is something, anything that offers hope of lifting them from where they are now to a little bit higher. So people know that it's a very problematic situation, but the hope is that if we can put together some sort of inclusive government where people can agree, especially on the economic narrative, and have some sort of economic vision and take things forward. We've got to start somewhere. I think that's what people at home are saying.
Coups are something that we've seen happen. I mean, this is, let's just look at the Ivory Coast, for example. I mean, we saw a coup which removed and really humiliated former President Laurent Gbagbo. So again, we need to see how it unfolds and if the same narrative is going to happen there. But I need to very quickly talk about Grace Mugabe, the First Lady, because this is what those that are in charge are saying at the heart of all of this. They do not want Grace Mugabe as the president of Zimbabwe. They feel that she already is the president, calling the shots. Mugabe is not in power, she's in power, and they are now trying to get rid of her. That this is more aimed at her than it is at President Robert Mugabe. Please give me some understanding here. Do we know where she is? Do we know if this is going to stop her? And how powerful is this lady and her supporters? Like you were saying, Professor, that we don't know if this is going to go as smoothly as one thinks it is.
There's still plenty of pitfalls. This is still a work in progress, and it could go either way. Grace Mugabe had built up a very powerful support base. At the moment, that support base is being decimated to some point, but she or her followers may still have a say. But at the end of the day, part of the thing that is at the heart of this, yes, there's Grace Mugabe, but part of the thing that is at the heart of it is that the President of Zimbabwe is also the Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces.
Indeed.
And that is one of the key issues. And it's a dual way. The President has a say on who is going to be in the military, but the military also feel that they have a say in who their Commander-in-Chief is. And that's one of the things that's at the heart of this. We want to have a say in who our chief is, and we want someone who we know from the liberation era. That's one of the things that's been at the heart of this.
Gentlemen, I have to leave it there, although I know there's so much to talk about more, but I think you've given us a clearer understanding as to what's going on and also where to from here. Professor David Moore, the Department of Development Issues at the University of Johannesburg, and Dr Knox Chitiyo, who's the Associate Fellow for African Programme at Chatham House in the UK. We'd love to hear from you. Please do send us your tweets and comments at Morning Live SABC with the situation regarding Zimbabwe. It's 7 o'clock.